Well, I'm glad everybody enjoyed lunch, and I hope you all enjoyed the morning. This afternoon really promises to be quite interesting, and I think it's going to go by very quickly before you know it. First of all, before the break this morning, as you recall, we asked you to go to, if you were interested, to go to our studio and reflect upon a change or innovation that you think would be a good idea for your city or your favorite city to make it more sustainable. Well, several of you did that, and we have a video which we're going to show you to see how you are sort of on-demand storytellers. So what would those changes be? Let's take a look.
A very easy, small innovation could help with energy conservation and water usage. And that would be that if the city had billboards as you're going down the street that had real-time energy use data and water use data.
Actually having the price structure of water be able to increase during times of low supply, so that you would actually incentivize people to save water.
We should redevelop all the rooftops of DC and have a master plan, and then connect each rooftop with a Highline-esque walking path.
Be a more active participant with City Hall, with the mayor of the city of Columbus, and the administrators and the politicians that work in the city of Columbus.
Turning old abandoned lots into playgrounds with busted out tires and wind chimes made out of cans.
I'm from the Bay Area, and I know in San Francisco we have a really great composting system, and right now I study at Northwestern University in Chicago, Illinois, and I'd really like to see the same thing happening in Chicago.
Just having a greater resource of information will be key.
Driverless cars. When you start having driverless cars come in, all of a sudden you have much more dense populations. You don't have to build parking decks.
We need to move away from coal, which is a huge provider of electricity in Arizona, to a cleaner energy system such as solar, and incentivizing not only the feasibility but the access to communities in Tucson, Arizona would be a great way to make Tucson more sustainable.
Bravo. So I was talking with somebody over at lunch, and I was telling him what one of my favorite innovations has been and what has made such a huge difference. When we moved into the city, right around the corner from me is a bus stop, so I can take the bus when I want. Well, the bus is very nice to take, but what really makes the difference is this app called NextBus. All right, and I can tap my app, right, and all the buses have GPS on them, and it tells me how many minutes the next bus is from my stop. So when it gets to 4 minutes, I walk around the corner and the bus arrives within 30 to 60 seconds. And then $1.65 later, and plenty of time on the bus to do my reading and whatever else, I'm downtown. And it's kind of like having, our Uber's guy is gone, it's kind of like having a much cheaper Uber pull up, only it's bigger. Anyway, those things make a big difference in how we live our urban lives and how efficient we can be with our time. Well, cities, the architect Daniel Libeskind said, are the greatest creation of humanity. The greatest creation of humanity. It's where our creativity and our art and our commerce and our ideas and our people and our diversity all come together. And that's really what we've been talking about here. How we experience that, how we change it, how we innovate it, and how we explain it and tell stories around it. We're sort of judged by what we build and how we build it. And that's what we're going to talk about now a little bit, the built environment, as we call it. So what will sustainable cities look like as they build out? What materials will they use? What space will they use? What will they revolutionize next? We got a lot of student stories on this, I'm happy to say. I got two of them quickly I want to show you now. One is a very low-tech solution. You heard of the tiny house movement? Who's heard of the tiny house movement? Okay, so this is a tiny house. This tiny house is for low income and the homeless. It was done by Heather Crosby from Sewanee University of the South. Here it is.
Reverend Jeff Carr lived in one of these tiny homes for 45 days, raising $50,000 to construct 6 homes. They are single room, 60 square feet residences. People who have for years been subjected to sleeping inside tents, under park benches, or in their cars, finally have a chance to have a home again, complete with a front porch and a door that locks. Even though it's small, it's something.
So even though it's small, it's something. Where are my Sewanee students? Do I have any in the room now? Oh, I think they stepped out. So this is a really interesting idea. We know that homelessness is a gigantic problem. People live in tents. That's very bad when it comes to weather. This is 60 square feet, and this particular church that this reverend was leading had started an effort in this direction. Not a straight line, but at least, as she says, a small start. Now, at the other end of the spectrum is the high-tech super city of the future. And here we had two GW students, Samantha Cohen and Eric Ostroff. Are they in the room? No? And they did this video actually at Gensler, which is around the corner, a couple blocks away. It's a design and architecture firm. You're about to hear somebody from Gensler. But they sat down with Carlos Cubillo, who's an architect and has been working on a city of the future, a sustainable city of the future. Take a look at what they
have some
heard.
umbrellas that are supposed to tilt, to capture the sun, produce energy, but also at the same time cast shadow. I think that's a cool one. And that umbrella also will capture wind, will bring the wind down to cool the pedestrian realm, and also will capture rain whenever it rains to allow us to recycle water, which is not always present. I think maybe in KKR that is one of the key innovations.
One of the key innovations. So what they were doing in this video was using the animation that Gensler had. They went and they sat down and they spoke with the architect, the person who had been working on the project. He spoke in first person why this mattered to him and then explained the project. And then they layered in both the music and the video to fully tell the story. In the preceding story, it was more sort of an experiential thing. Heather Crosby went out to the tiny house, explained what she was seeing, had done some research and put it sort of in a third person kind of thing. For much of it, first person in the other. So these stories come at this both a little bit differently. In the tiny house, it's really Heather's experience and what she's seeing and learning and discovering, and she tells the story through her own eyes. In the case of Eric and Samantha, they're telling the story through the eyes of the expert. But that's some of the ways we tell stories. I would like to introduce for you now somebody who both tells stories and makes them. Jordan Goldstein is a regional managing partner with Gensler, whose colleague you just heard there a moment ago, which is it's a global design and architecture firm. Jordan is a visionary on design and the future of design. He's received any number of awards for the work he's done in this area. And I'd like you to join me, please, in welcoming Jordan Goldstein. Jordan. Thank you for coming by.
Thanks, Frank.
Before you launch, though, just set the stage a little bit about kind of what you're working on now and some dimension, because I don't think you're working on tiny houses.
No tiny houses. No, we're talking difference in scale. So we have some great projects that we've been working on, and I'm going to show some of the ones that are coming off the boards now, but some other ones that are on it. A 60-story vertical mixed-use tower in Bangkok, Thailand, that mixes retail, mixes condominium and residential and hotel, working on the rest of a campus, which I'm going to show now for Duke University, which is the first campus overseas, full campus, for a top-tier university.
And cities are hot? I mean, are you finding that this is where the action is?
A lot of new city opportunities. So when we think about it, new cities means really starting from scratch and taking a blank canvas. These are new cities. New cities and foreign lands.
In the desert, in the jungle, on the ocean?
Yeah, we did one. It was called KCARE. It was King Abdullah Community for Atomic and Renewable Energy, which you just saw a little bit of a clip on, which is a total new city, all based on renewable energy. So it's basically taking land away from a major urban area and saying, you know what, we're going to try to do something different from scratch on this piece of land over here. And we see more and more of that happening in Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East.
Who's been to Asia and seen some of this incredible construction? All right, so you have some sense, it's like almost otherworldly. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. Well, it's great to be with all of you today. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the future of cities, but I wanted to do so in a way that really hits at three concepts that I find our designers around the world, me and my teams, really kind of looking at through different lenses. So I thought I'd throw out these three concepts and talk about how we're looking at them. And for us, we are 46 offices around the world. We're over 5,000 people. That's the largest architecture and design firm in the world. And as Frank said, we're just a short hop away here in DC for the Gensler local office here. I'm going to start off talking about vertical cities, which is a concept that we're seeing more and more in urban areas. And what you're seeing there, that tall one right there on to the right, is the Shanghai Tower. How many people have heard about Shanghai Tower? Not a lot. Okay, well, Shanghai Tower just opened a couple months ago. It is the second tallest building in the world. It's the tallest building in Asia, 121 stories. It is 642 meters tall, so multiply that by 3.3 feet. But it's trying to do something very different. It's just not trying to be a tall building and be an icon. It's trying to say something different about cities. And what this is actually, if you look at that, it may be hard to figure what that is, but it's actually a part of the skyline of a city that we've turned on its side. Why have we done that? Because when we think about cities, we usually think about them laterally in blocks. And instead, what we've thought about it here is vertical. So the image to the right is the first sketch of Shanghai Tower. And when we looked at this, we said, you know what? Why don't we try a vertical strategy where instead of thinking about blocks laterally, we're going to think about zones vertically. And you have 9 zones in this building, each of which has its own sky garden. That sky garden becomes, in a sense, the neighborhood park for the neighborhood of that zone. So you take your shuttle express elevators, and there's 106 elevators in this building. Think about that, right? Up to your zones, and then within that, you actually circulate up and down. Pretty amazing. But in order to do this, we didn't want to just stop there. We said we really want to rethink what it means to be a tall building. So by twisting the form, we actually reduced the wind load on the building by 24% and saved $58 million in construction costs. And also we put wind turbines at the top that actually provide power to the building. And rather than putting a spire at the top, which you see so many conventional towers do, we said, you know what? We're going to create an inverted cone, and we're going to use that to harvest rainwater and be able to use that throughout the building. And this is the view from the top. Pretty amazing, right? So I wanted to also talk to you about another concept that we're looking at, and resiliency. Often when you think about resiliency, you think about like something about responding to natural disasters. Well, how about through a different lens? How about looking at it through strengthening our communities and our cities through social, economic, and community moves that actually create a fabric within that city that allows that city to be able to grow in a sustainable way and in a way that starts to think differently about its engines going forward. The first one I wanted to touch on is one called Mecca Techno Valley. So this one is a techpreneurial new approach to thinking about a city. So this is in Saudi Arabia. And rather than think through an oil-dependent economy for a city, this new city and new zone actually looks at thinking about it through a knowledge-based economy and saying, let's create a series of buildings and spaces that reflect the environment and the climate that we're dealing with, and then also look at how we can create hubs for innovation and technology that can be located and clustered around in a mixed-use type setting. Not too far away in Baltimore, we thought about how do you bring pride of place back into community, and especially into communities that don't have the budget to be able to do large-scale master planning. So in this particular case, we work with 7 neighborhoods together through a series of community planning efforts to figure out a resiliency strategy for their own environment. And what you see here is some of the imagery that came out of that. And it starts to stitch together the boundaries that divide neighborhoods. So rather than look at territorial areas, bring communities together and start to put them all out in a level playing field where we say, how can we work together to better off the larger socioeconomic status for everybody? So 8,000 miles away, a very different kind of resiliency. This is a campus that I mentioned a second ago. This is for Duke University. And in 2009, I was asked by Duke University to take our team and think about what does it mean to be a global brand and actually create a whole new campus from scratch. In this case, it's in Kunshan, China, which is about 35 miles west of Shanghai. So for this, what you're seeing is a drone aerial view of the finished first phase of the campus, which is 40 acres and 6 buildings, about 750,000 square feet. But rather than kind of do the gut check design and say, we're just going to do a campus that, in a sense, reflects everything we know about conventional campus design, we put everything aside and let's create an environment that mixes outdoor and indoor spaces, low-rise density, very walkable, pedestrian-friendly environment that basically says that learning can happen anywhere. And the spaces that are designed inside and out are meant to preach that for anybody that's going there, you don't have to be in a classroom. It's the spaces in between that are just as important as the spaces that we're in now. So you have views like this and like this, where water is used as a vehicle really to actually create those interesting boundaries between those outdoor spaces and those indoor spaces that allows you to be able to be at that edge and be part of an outdoor great learning experience. And when you're indoors, being able to feel outdoors. The other concept I wanted to touch on with everyone today is the idea of disruptors. Frank mentioned a few that are app-based, that are affecting mobility. Well, how about disruptors that change the built environment? And there's quite a few that are fascinating right now. The first one is 3D printing. How many of you have played with a 3D printer? Just a few. Well, think about 3D printing of buildings. So this is a 3D printed building. It's a printer that's 20 feet high, it's in Shanghai, and it can print buildings. So what does that mean? It means that you can think very differently about the construction process. It means that we can reduce labor costs by up to 50 to 80%, depending on the type of project. We can reduce construction waste by 30 to 60%, and we can speed up construction time by virtue of less trades involved and a more modular strategy to how we actually get buildings built. This is some examples of the first one that was actually built in Shanghai and then transported to Dubai. And start to think about that from a standpoint of cities. When you look at construction around this city, construction can take 2 to 3 years for a new building. What if it took 2 weeks? What if it was a smaller building and it took 2 days? It really changes how we think about the built environment. So I wanted to take you over to Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh had a downtown area that was struggling, but it had a company, in the case of PNC Bank, that really wanted to be a community player and had a strong commitment to sustainability. So what you're seeing here is the recently completed PNC Tower. It is the greenest building in the United States, by far. So it's LEED Platinum, but it goes well beyond that. It has one of the first breathable skins on this side of the pond. And what does it mean? It means to think differently about being green, being urban, and being dense in a large metropolitan area. So what does this breathable skin do? It actually has a building skin that wraps around the building that's tied to a computer system that's checking the weather and monitoring conditions. And if the weather's good, like it is today outside, it literally would open up the building, right? And then it's done in a way that air is pulled through as a passive solar chimney that uses the stack of the building to channel heat out. And it has a waste reduction strategy that uses 77% less water than a typical office building that you see today. And it does so in a way that contributes to the community by virtue of being a strong player. So what I wanted to do with these 3 concepts is share with you 3 of the many concepts that are on the table that architects in our firm and frankly around the world are looking at to really reshape our built environment using technology, using techniques, using a different thought process to really channel a different level of energy to thinking about how we can be contributors to a better live, work, play environment. Thank you very much.
So Jordan, this is amazing, and I want to open it up to the conversation, but I really do want to ask you first about this thing that's kind of astonishing, which is, 3D printing buildings. We're really doing this now?
Yeah, we are doing this now, yes.
And this, do I want to live in one of these, or does it get blown away?
Maybe wait a couple years.
Yeah.
So, the thing about 3D printing is it's now becoming so commonplace that I went into an office equipment place to go buy a laser printer, right? And I walk in and there's an aisle of laser printer, and I'm with my kids, and on the other side is a whole aisle of 3D printers. So I'm going to laser printer, my kids are going over to 3D printers, and they're like, Dad, we want that one, right? But if you can print, if you think about it, there's actually a futurist that actually said this one, which I thought was brilliant, is that the microwave homes of today, microwaves in the homes of today will actually be the 3D printers of tomorrow, meaning that every house could have a 3D printer where you say, you know what, I need a new iPhone case this morning. Boom, print it out. New shoes, print it out, right? But then when it becomes buildings, it totally changes the game. Imagine whole communities where each house is printed up to order.
Now, one more, and then open it up to your questions. In the urban space, all right. So we saw these, tall, amazing vertical structures, and for people who are watching the housing market and other things in New York, for example, we hear about these, super high-end luxury condos that are very compact, very, sort of columns in the sky. Is that the big sort of technology architectural shift that
I think there's an interesting struggle going on right now in the residential market, which is many of you have probably seen the rise of micro-housing. So I can go downtown and I can get a small little space where it's just basically my living room, where it's right where I'm kind of sleeping and kind of getting myself prepped for the day, but everything else is common space. So it's a big bump up in amenity and common space to decrease in the personal space. Well, there's a struggle with that, and we're seeing that right here in this city, where all of a sudden you have building departments and existing local communities that said, wait a sec, if all the new houses become micro-housing, what does that do for keeping families in the city, right? It makes them want to leave and flee out to the suburbs. So I think we're seeing a pushback to that.
All right, the other question that comes up again and again and again, and we're going to have more of a conversation about this later, is how we manage equity at a time of soaring real estate values in the city and really nice expensive architects like you coming in to build buildings that wealthy people can buy but others cannot. De Blasio in New York has tried to really push affordable housing into communities. There's similar efforts here in Washington. San Francisco is in a full-out crisis mode because the technology sector has driven prices. And I was talking to somebody the other day, a young person, who was looking at a two-bedroom apartment. He said, basically, if I want to do a two-bedroom place in San Francisco, it'll cost me north of $5,000 a month.
Yeah. It's shocking, and by the way, we'll offer a coupon for you, so it'll be cheaper for you. But I think it's a huge issue, and I think that's why you're going to see.
That's why people are going to Huntsville, Alabama.
Yeah, well, there's some good things going on there, right? But I think you're going to really see a rise in the kind of WeWork of housing. So We Live is an interesting concept that's out there, where it's not, you don't necessarily need to own this house, and you don't necessarily need to own a specific amount of real estate. It's almost rethinking co-op, right? But in a totally different way, in a much more crowdsourced, millennial-friendly way.
We got some questions for you through Pigeonhole here, and then we're going to come down to the floor. What are your opinions on having an entire city within a building? In other words, every resource one might need all in one structure.
Well, Shanghai Tower is a really interesting one. I actually think that the more that the vertical tower can be rethought to really have a lot of the needs that you would need on a given day, I actually think is really a worthy subject. And the reason I say that is because if you think about it, in urban cities, like if you look at Shanghai today, you can go to the 30-story point and look out and you'll see tall buildings to the horizon in every direction, right? How sustainable is that with people moving down? I want to go get a cup of coffee. I go down 30 floors, go out to the street. Well, why not be able to have those in kind of a stacked scenario?
Okay, well, let me push back on this a little bit, and Mayor Moyo might have some interesting thoughts on this too, because so I think about putting an entire community in one building. Do they go out on the street? Do they experience the rest of the city? Do they travel back and forth? Do they meet people who are outside their own ecosystem?
Well, the trick in doing this, and I think we see this in some of the projects we have in the Middle East, for instance, when we're doing new town planning, and in Southeast Asia, is that you have to stitch together a narrative where it's not all about you and your building. It's about a community. And there's amenities and there's actual green spaces that encourage you to come down and socialize.
How many people, young people who haven't graduated yet, how many of you want to at least start in a city someplace? Okay, so why?
Just the environment, the number of people, the amount of things to do, the activities, I guess.
All right, somebody got another reason? Yeah? That's where the jobs are.
There you go.
Okay, fair enough.
10 points.
Anybody else? Easy commute. How are they going to afford it? What is it going to look like 15 years from now?
Well, I think cities have to really reinvent themselves, and you can't just do that wholesale, unless you're doing some of these new towns that we're doing. And largely in the U.S., it's going to be rethinking areas and rethinking policy that leads to a different strategy for living. I saw a stat the other day, 67% of millennials don't have or don't want a car, right? So what does that mean for radius of amenities that are walkable, that are easily accessible, that allow you to live the life that you want to live?
Question? Anybody got something? Yes. tell them who you are and where you're from.
Good afternoon. My name is Harrison Watson. I'm from Jackson State University. Do these have to be questions related to what he just said?
No.
Okay, so you all talked about you talked about the 3D printed houses. Are we to expect that these 20-foot 3D printers themselves are going to be sustainable and environmentally friendly?
Yeah, what's interesting, it's a great question. More and more, right now, not yet. I mean, but it's going to continue to evolve at a really fast pace. And one of the things I think you're going to see is that the ink that they used is actually recycled content. So, right now they're kind of experiment with different inks. But some of the ones, some of the ones that I showed you, they're being built and tested out with all recycled content mixed into the ink. So if you think about it, you take down that building, all that stuff becomes, in a sense, the basis of ingredients for a new building. So your kind of life cycle totally changes.
Who else? Yeah. Actually, I think let me come to you. I'll come back to more. Go ahead. No, it's yours. Just shout out your name, where you're from. It went away? Yeah. Okay. It'll come back. Go ahead. We'll come back here.
Hi, my name's Matt. I grew up in D.C. I'm interested. So you basically took the idea of the city in this direction and you put it up like this, and then also bringing in elements of like what you were saying about being in random public space is awesome, and that traditionally happens on ground zero, the first floor. And so how do you see, like, if you were to go into a jungle, organisms are all on top of each other and like sharing resources and climbing up all over the place. How do you see that influencing the design of cities where, buildings are molding into other buildings and the public space is on multiple levels, and you have things like the High Line, like was mentioned in the little video, like are playing a role where, the random public space and the interaction that is so crucial to cities isn't limited to ground zero. So you can have these massively tall buildings, but you don't create that disconnection by doing so.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I can respond maybe more from a personal standpoint. And for me, two kind of, experiences early in my career really caused me to think differently about cities and the built environment. One was studying architecture and living in Tokyo. And then the other, to contrast with that, was living with the Zuni Native American tribe in New Mexico. And as a closed reservation, it's a pueblo, and it's been operating in a similar way for, hundreds of years. But what's amazing about that is both environments, the heavily urban one of Tokyo and this, in a sense, rural but dense population on the pueblo is actually living in a world where it's stacked outdoor spaces, right? And stacked residential. And finding a way to actually have activity happen at all different levels. So the ecosystems of both are very different, but they're using some similar principles, which I really think can inform how we make great urban environments that take advantage of outdoor spaces at multiple levels, but also respect the need for indoor spaces, but stack them in ways that they have great accessibility and interactivity with the outdoor.
Okay. Can you be really quick, because we got to move on. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what are the metrics that you use to say that you're building sustainably?
Yeah, what are the metrics?
That is a great question. We throw the word sustainable around a lot, so what does it actually mean when you're building?
So the baseline used to be LEED, and LEED is still a phenomenal program, which has a whole series of metrics that you measure to say, your building is achieving a certain level of sustainability. We use that now as kind of a basis of design and go above that. So something like the PNC Tower, which has been open for less than a year already, is kicking back metrics in all these different categories. And one of the amazing things is that there's 92% of the floor plates on every floor plate is totally accessible by natural light. So if you think about that, what would that mean for utilities, right? So it actually, you already are seeing, because they've gone through a couple seasons, some really great metrics that are coming out that says, that strategy actually works.
Jordan, thank you so much. It's so interesting to see where you're doing, where you're going, what you're doing, and what you're building with. So we're gonna have to dive into this a little bit more in the future.
Thanks, guys.
Really appreciate it.